we catch everything. Okay. All right. I guess the first order of business is always, what disasters have occurred in the past week. I'm kind of shooting that in your direction. I had, no real disasters, just continuing uproar. As You Learn doesn't work right. Banner doesn't work right. Zoom doesn't work right. What else? I guess nothing works right at the moment. So, what's happening in your buildings? What's happening in your world?
Alicia, were you about to talk? I saw you unmuted.
Sure, go.
All right, I'll take it then. We are deciding to offer a Twilight Academy. So that would still be virtual school, but the hours would be 5 to 7 for those that are unable to have someone assist them with digital instruction during the day. Obviously, there's been some concerns over that, like, are you paid additional? Does that change your hours of your regular workday, whether you're teleworking or working in the building? I think I do appreciate the moves that the county have made for children, but again, it's one other thing that they're asking us as educators to do. So it'll be interesting to see how that's fully implemented.
Yeah, and whether it's an emergency model or whether it becomes part of the cast of characters that they might call on, at any point in time in the future. So yeah, it's got to do what you got to do, but you never know how that might pan out in the future. Other folks, new and thrilling and exciting stuff.
Well, I work at the alternative school, and amazingly, we're receiving applications for students to come to Race Street. So just trying to figure out how that all works when we're offering the same thing that everybody else is, remote learning.
I don't know, but hey, what can you say? It's kind of interesting, this whole thing about enrollments. I've obviously I'm in higher ed, and so in higher ed, it's like, okay, all their enrollments are up. At App, our undergraduate enrollments are up 3 or 4%. From last year, our graduate enrollments are up 11%. Everything is up. Now, normally in higher ed, you expect to see that when the jobs picture is not too good and an economic crash, because higher ed becomes a kind of a holding pattern for some folks that maybe they had not perceived that might be a way they would go, but when there's no jobs to get or whatever, then higher ed becomes kind of plan B for a lot of people. But it's kind of unusual in this midst of all this mess as to see the enrollments up, and I think that's consistent pretty much everywhere. I'm here in Harrisonburg, Virginia, where JMU is at, James Madison's at, and their enrollment's up. Their enrollments are up about the same amount, about 3 or 4% undergraduate, 11% plus graduate school, or actually a little bit more, about 14% of graduate school, I think. And so their enrollments are up over 23,000, I think, and APP's enrollment now is over 20,000. 20,023. I think they're making a big deal out of that. And so it's kind of one of those things where you have enrollments up, but what else is up? The number of active COVID cases on campus and in the surrounding community. And one thing that higher ed doesn't have quite the capacity that you have in PK-12 to manage student behavior is a little bit better or whatever. You know, you bring 19, 20, 21-year-olds on campus, and having a college experience without the parties is simply not what they want, what they signed up for. And so if they come back to campus, you know, you can control stuff on campus, but immediately off campus, you know, fraternity parties, sorority parties, group parties, apartment building parties, parties wherever. And so the positive, you know, the positivity rate of test of those students that are testing positive, when of all the tests that they're given, the positivity rate now is up around 17, 18, 19%. So, you know, we're looking at, you know, 300 or 400 now, 200 or 300 now, but I suspect by, Labor Day next week, we'll be up around 500 plus, if not closer over that. And then there's decisions that have to be made at some point in time, because most of their quarantine spaces will have been eaten up by then. And so there'll be no real plan to quarantine additional students or beds to put students that have some symptoms into or whatever. So it'll be interesting. Yeah. I kind of enjoy being a faculty and watching the chaos from the sidelines, because I imagine there are a lot of administrators that, but this is where you earn your keep. This is where you make your money, is when the crisis hits and when the chaos sets in. That's when administrators become, you know, worth what you're paying them or not, you know, one or the other. And you spot them real quick. You find out who can manage the building and who can't manage the institution. And so it's an interesting time. Yeah. Other things going on?
Similar to, go ahead, Sydney.
No, you go ahead, Paul.
I was gonna say similar to that, but I guess less on the sidelines. We used our quarantine isolation zone in our building for the first time today. We had a student with some congestion and some coughing and a couple other symptoms. So we got him in there, and I called home, and mom was like, yeah, he's got asthma. And, you know, I was like, I'm no doctor, but I don't know, like, I want a doctor's note saying that that's the issue here. And then he's got 2 other siblings in the school. So I was like, well, technically according to our health screener, it's 24 hours until everyone is symptom free before anyone in the household can return, you know, or we have a doctor's note saying it. Yeah, this is an unusual case of asthma that's presenting itself right now.
Yeah, it's yeah, there's a couple of issues there. One is the fact that, you know, as we move into, you know, school season and early fall season, I mean, it hadn't felt much like fall quite yet, but then we start to see the flus beginning to show up, and you know, the common colds beginning to show up and things like that. And how do you distinguish? How do you make that call? I mean, you almost have to do if you don't have the testing regimen to deal with that, and most school divisions still don't have a testing regimen to really deal with that. You have no choice but to send them home. And then you have the thing of the what I like to call the parental truth meter, and it gets a little bit wonky in times like this, where maybe they have to go to work, and maybe they don't have any way to take care of the kids, and, you know, things like that, or maybe they don't want the older grandparents coming in to take care of the kids. Maybe for their safety, they don't want that to happen. But there is that sort of truth meter that you have to kind of break out and figure out whether parents are looking for the most optimistic outcome, or whether they're really just kind of hoping and praying that somebody else will take these kids off their hands so they can go to work. I don't know. It's a kind of a tough call from a parent's perspective. So you gotta understand the motivation and sort of what's going through folks' minds as you are on the other end of those calls, because you know, it could be a lot of things going on. You don't know.
Well, I have a celebration, guys. You know, we're all Mountaineers now. since we're all going through ASU. I did my undergraduate through ASU, and today is the anniversary of the upset in the big house. So I just wanted to say happy September 1, everybody. It's a big day. Big day. So
Yeah.
want to get that out there. It was a great time in Boone then. I can't imagine if COVID wasn't happening whenever that happened. So
Yeah.
special day.
Yeah, it is a special day. I mean, it was one of those days that was it that year? I guess it was the next year when JMU beat Virginia Tech down at Tech, and they were supposed to be a top 10 team at that time. Turned out they ended up in top 20, but you know, it'll be interesting. You know, you get those crazy things that kind of happen, but you know, as they say in sports, that's why you play the games, and it's who shows up. Basically, it's not a matter of. It is a matter of talent and speed and all that sort of stuff, but a lot of times it's who shows up.
Right, Michigan was a top 5 team, and they had some Heisman hopefuls, and they ended up beating Florida in their bowl game that year, which Tim Tebow was the quarterback. So we had a lot of claim to fame.
Yeah, y'all showed up. They didn't that day.
That's right.
It was going to be a walkthrough. But it was you know, something to celebrate. It's kind of interesting. It'll be interesting to watch how this fall season plays out. And a lot of the FCS conferences, they've already kind of backed off and made the decision to try for a spring football season. Of course, Big Ten canceled, didn't they? Big Ten canceled, pulled the plug, and
Big Ten voted to move it to the spring.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah, they did a push, but certain schools are trying to find games. But I mean, the president has to say so of that university, so they're just doing the dance now. But like apps, we've dropped games, but we also picked up games because of the fact. So we're still hopeful everything should be all right.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, it's everything kind of, and you know, of course, from a faculty perspective, a lot. You hear people saying, well, you know, we are not, that will be the last thing to worry about. But, you know, as someone who has coached and all that sort of stuff, you kind of understand that for a lot of kids, that's the draw. I like you know, John Thompson passed away this week, and you know, you've probably heard the story, you've seen the story, but I went to a couple of his coaching clinics way back in the day when I was coaching high school basketball, and we went to a couple of his clinics, and he always told us the story about how, you know, you go to his office and there's this old beat up deflated basketball sitting on his desk, you know, normally where you have a trophy or something like that, this old beat up deflated basketball. And he used to tell all his recruits when they came in and their parents when they came in to meet him is that he just wanted everybody to know that someday the arrow will come out of the ball and you'll have to make a living some other way. And during his 30-some years, 27 years, 37, I forget how many years he was at Georgetown, he had a 97% graduation rate of all those students, and he only had a handful, maybe a couple of dozen that went early to the pros. But of all the other students, he had a 97% graduation rate. And so that's the one thing that was lost about him. And he won 540 some games, I believe, and only lost 225 or 230 or something like that. So, you know, that speaks for itself. But yeah, we'll see how the sports angle plays out. You know, I'm not too worried about college sports because they can, you know, and particularly the big boys, they can always live off of TV rights for a while. I mean, they'll get a pretty good chunk of change off of TV rights if they can play, if they can get a schedule together. But you know, the smaller schools and then of course the high schools, I mean, you basically from a lot of perspectives, you have to just kind of look at that and say, okay, but you know, do we really want to go? Do we really want to try it, or do we really want to see what we can do? And so there's a lot of heated discussion about that too. We'll see how most of it plays out. But I'm scared to death about the flu season, because it looks like the flu season might hit almost exactly when the next sort of cycle of COVID kicks in, and that could be a difficult time to manage. But we'll see. Other thoughts? Don't mean to be totally depressing. You know, I love basketball. I love football. I love soccer. I love curling. I love every damn sport. So, you know, I've had season tickets here at JMU for football and basketball now for 41 years. So, you know, we'll just kind of see how all that turns out. But yeah, crisis is an interesting management style. And we'll talk about that in a minute when we get into some of the management theories, management styles, because you're, you know, and we get into the notion of strategic planning, because you know, the idea of a strategic plan is that you have a vision for where you want to be, and you can take a good look at where you are, and you can figure out what's the gap between where you are and where you want to be, and, you know, what are the strategies and what are the, you know, different sorts of resources and all you need to get there. But, you know, if suddenly a mountain appears in your way, what do you do? I mean, how do you make kind of an adaptation to that? And so there, you know, there are, in essence, there are plan Bs, and there are management model Bs and things like that, because sometimes you have to shift. Sometimes you have to go a different direction because you know, stuff happens. You can't predict it. You can't anticipate it. You just walk right into it and figure out how to deal with it. And that's, to some extent, that's been the COVID thing, in that it just showed up. And we couldn't have anticipated the level of mismanagement across the country. You know, you kind of hope, you know, the governmental entities will do better, but obviously they didn't. And so we're kind of stuck where they are. But you know, you got kids coming, you got parents depending on you, you got a community depending on you. So what's model B and what's plan B and plan C and D and E and whatever other plan there are, because we need to get kids educated. We need to get them back in the education process somehow. So we have to see. All right, I get off lecture. I'm sorry, I'm soapboxing a little bit. And in the middle of this, we have, you know, all the social upheaval around, you know, diversity and Black Lives Matter, and, you know, all those issues that are key, core, crucial issues that we need to deal with. And, you know, we have to deal with them within the context, within the flavor of the current COVID crisis. So we have to, nothing is separated. Everything is homogenized. It's all together. And so, you know, it's an interesting time. It really is an interesting time. If you were an outside observer and you weren't right in the middle of it, you would say, this is a very interesting time to watch human culture and see what happens. And we'll just, but being right in the middle of it makes it a bit more difficult. Okay, I have, you'll find up on As You Learn, you'll find the groupings up on the As You Learn site page. I can't officially put you in a group yet, because As You Learn is not talking to Banner, where all the official records are, and Banner is not talking to anybody. And so it won't link to Banner, so I can't even get a roster of participants in this class. And so as soon as Banner comes back up, which I'm hoping is in the next day or so, I hope it's not until, I hope they don't wait till Friday, but they're gonna do some maintenance stuff with As You Learn on Friday, and that may be part of that package too, of what they're trying to do is to get the Banner student records management system keyed back in with As You Learn. But right now we can't, I can't add students, I can't do anything. So it's, it's kind of a crazy sort of thing. So the groupings you see up on the As You Learn page are the correct groupings. I just don't have you officially assigned into groups yet. So for the purposes of projects and things like that. So that'll happen as soon as I can get As You Learn and Banner. We'll talk to each other again. So we'll once again kind of play this thing out as it goes. Well, there were two things I wanted to attend to tonight. One was to kind of pick up where we left off with some notions of management theories, and I just want to touch base on a couple more and not really dwell too much on that because this isn't a management 300 class or whatever. So, but we'll touch on a few of those because they are kind of useful in you thinking about what your management style is going to be, and which kind of theoretical direction are you going to take, which you have to. You have to figure out, what is it that guides the decisions you make, and what is the process that guides the decisions you make. And so that's kind of a management theory model. And at the same time, you have to kind of understand what is this thing, what is the purpose of this institution that you are working in. I mean, what is it that it does? What is its goal? What is its primary mission? What's the mission statement? What's the tagline, if you nothing else? And from that, what do you spin out as, strategic directions? Where do you go? What are the strategies you employ? What are the data points that you use to see how well you're doing? All of those things have to come out. But first, you have to have a clear notion of where you need to be or where you want to be. And that becomes much more of a inside out sort of process. It's not a top down, it's an inside out, because you have to have agreement among all the sort of the elements of the organization or the building or the division or whatever. You have to have an agreement that these are the things that I value, that they value, along with the things that the system values or the building values or the institution values. And so you have to be really clear about what those things are, even though your strategic plan, your strategic direction is one thing, but then your strategic plan is something quite different. I did not like the one of the books, I think it was a Tracy, I forget which one, maybe it was the Hooper one, where they talked about the difference between a strategic plan and a long-range plan. And that to me was kind of a nebulous sort of distinction that we're trying to make, and it's not one that you'll find in most of the management guides that you run into in other areas of inquiry, like in management theories and things like that. But they made that distinction, and I kind of, I'll use their words, but I don't necessarily see those as two distinctly different things. I see, strategic direction is kind of where you're going, your goals, your mission, your model, and all that. And then the strategic plan is what are the specific things that each of the units or in each of the entities within the institution are going to do to implement that direction. And so it is a kind of a subtle distinction, but it's a very real distinction. And then your management theory basically has to align with, you know, sort of what's that mission and how you get there and how you're going to do that. And you know, some sorts of managers just can't do that as well, and that's why institutions a lot of times like to hire from within, because they like to hire people that have already bought in to that mission, to that model. And so there's a great deal of that sort of inbreeding that happens in organizations sometimes, because you have that. You have people there that are already bought in to your mission, so you just, you know, bring them up. They have the skill set to do it. But anyhow, that's the second part. We'll talk through just a couple of these management theories, and then we'll get into the strategic planning and get a little bit more interactive as you kind of think about any sort of strategic planning process that you've been a part of or are a part of at the moment. And you know, are you clear in terms of knowing what the mission is of the institution you're kind of doing the classwork around? And are you clear about you know, how they intend to accomplish that mission, the recognition of the gaps that might be between where they want to be and where they are? You know, all of those things are key, and we'll kind of get into those you know, a little bit more in just a few minutes. So with that part in mind, any other thoughts or questions before we kind of talk through the last of these management theory notions? I'm assuming that you've probably landed a book by now and have had a chance to get into some of the readings a bit. Nothing? Okay. Yeah. All right. Let me share up this little PowerPoint that I was using last week a little bit. See if I can get this to get more manageable Notion. And get everybody in my screen on. Okay, there we go. Okay. Last week, I think we stopped, or we left off at the sort of notions of servant leadership model as a leadership model, as a leadership / management model. And, you know, I think we left off on this particular slide. I don't know whether we went through all the sort of the pieces in here, but in thinking about sort of the model of servant leadership, one of the issues is that you, as a leader, you kind of parcel out power. You know, you kind of divide out the power. It's kind of like if you think about it as, you know, a quantity of things. You know, power is a quantity. There's, you know, there is a certain amount of power in any sort of organization, any sort of structure, any sort of building. And you can centralize it and have all the power at one place, or you can parcel it out and decentralize it and have the power kind of spread across the building. And in all organizations or all schools or all divisions, whatever, there is a certain amount of that parsing and that parceling out that takes place. In a servant leadership model, that becomes almost an extreme, because whoever is the leader really is operating through all the other elements of the structure. And so they directly don't have, you know, power to throw around, or, you know, they can't throw their weight around, so to speak, or whatever. And so it's a matter of sort of leading people to where we need to go in ways that I'm not talking about being devious here, but in ways that they don't necessarily perhaps see the goal as much as you do. But you're trying to get them to some decision or some unanimity about what needs to be done and how we're going to do it. And so this model is one that, as I mentioned last time, you don't see a lot in public schools. You see a lot in private schools, or you see a lot in specialized schools or programs, within schools, where you sort of it's the model you have to take, but it is one that is kind of least favored by a lot of people, simply because you don't have the power in a leader position to make quick decisions. And in a chaotic crisis, in a chaos like what we're going through right now, decisions have to be made fairly quickly, even if they're wrong, because you have to keep moving forward. And if you make a wrong decision, it will reveal itself, and then you'll have to make another decision. But decisions can't be as thought out as you would hope they would be in most circumstances. And so it's not the leadership model that you would like to draw on in chaotic situations, because it does move a bit more slowly, and it does take a while to get to a point where you can make a decision. And so that's part of the drawback of that. There's a lot of there's constantly a lot of opinion pieces in the leadership literature. There's almost no really strong empirical studies about servant leadership and the effectiveness of that model. And so you need to be aware of that we don't know really that much about it and how effective it can be. Any thoughts about servant model before we kind of quickly run through some of these others? Okay. Just on this slide, I just have a kind of a few that we're going to talk very quickly about, a couple of them. Mainly the first two, situational leadership and Glickman's supervision of instruction. And there are circumstances in which you have to kind of work with the context and see what the context is and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And then there's the classic theory X and Y model, and that's used a lot in sort of industry over the years, and particularly in kind of high-level positions in industry. Transactional model is really one that's not terribly useful for most people, because it's based on a model that says you take every interaction you have with others in the organization, with others in other organizations, and you try to win each of those transactions. And it doesn't matter, you just want to win the transactions, and the idea is if you win all the battles, you'll win the war. Well, that's not necessarily the case. We have a leader now high up in our government that's a very transactional leader, and he just tries to win every conversation, he tries to win every time, every conversation, and that's a transactional model. And it's not terribly useful, because there's not a lot of consistency in it, and there's no long-term pattern that you can find in a person's decision if it's always transactional. And of course, authoritarian model, easy for you to say, but it's you know, it's basically that. It's a model. It's all top down. The decisions are all made at the top. Everything that you know, anything that happens in the organization has to go to the top, have a decision made, and come back down. And not a terribly useful model in most cases, because it doesn't allow for the input from the people that are actually doing the work. Transformational model, you see those in education ever so often. You'll hire somebody new to come into a division or a building with the intent that they're only going to be there 3 to 5 years. Because if somebody is entrenched in a, say, in a system or in a building, it's very difficult for them to make any sort of meaningful transformations. And it's useful when you need large transformations in a fairly, you know, short amount of time. And so this transformational model is generally a short-term approach. And you have a lot of guys that made a lot of money going around the country and, you know, transforming school divisions and buildings and organizations in a 3 to 5 year time frame, and then they either get fired or they're out the door. You know, the contract doesn't renew, or they take off and go someplace else. And you know, it's not a way an organization can survive day to day to day, but it is a way of realizing that you may have individuals within the organization that really you don't know that they're going to be too good making transformation, because they have too many vested interests and they have too many close connections within the organization. And you know, I had the wonderful job of taking over a department and at a university. They had 46 faculty members in it. And I was told I was going to be in that job 3 years, and I needed to transform that department from what it was to, you know, a direction that the university wanted to go in. And so I ended up having to, you know, fire 2 or 3 people or cut loose 2 or 3 people that I had hired in another position within the college. And so it was, you know, those are things that you kind of have to do. And, you know, it was a shame, but it was what had to happen. So, you know, nobody burned my house down, and I don't think I had a contract put out on me or anything like that, but it was, you know, you just have to do those things. Sometimes you have to do, and transformational people typically don't stick around. They come in, they do, you know, they're 3 to 5 years, and then they're gone. And then you bring somebody in that can be a stabilizer, and maybe that's somebody from within the organization that's bought into the new structures. Collaborative, this is one of those kind of spinoffs from the whole democratic education movement, transferred over into leadership. And if all your decisions are collaborative decisions, and you can't make decisions until you have reached a consensus, chances are you're not going to make a whole lot of decisions. And so it has a place, but it really is difficult to do a collaborative model in an organization where there has to be some structure and some decision making. And you know, there's a little bit more information about the situational theory X and Y and situational leadership here. Yeah, X and Y is where you look at each person that you supervise, and you put them in 1 or 2 categories. You're optimistic about their progress in the organization, or you're pessimistic about their progress in the organization. And depending upon which category a person is in, it also determines what assignments they get placed into, and you know, the sort of the amount of time it may take them to move forward in the organization. And typically, if you're an X, if you're you know, in the pessimistic ledger, you won't get very far. And a lot of times, managers or leadership that follows this sort of theory X and Y will counsel people in the X group out. You know, as a building leader in a school division, if you're getting an excellent, I always found this, if you're getting an excellent reference from another building leader on somebody that wants to come to your building, I always got to ask a little bit more. Because I always figure if they're that good, why are you willing to let them go? And I kind of categorize those leaders as kind of this XY theory thing. You know, let's see if we can get them out of the building. They're not bad enough that I need to let them go, but they are bad enough that I need to get them out of my building. And so, and situational leadership, essentially in school buildings, you have 2 or 3 categories of employees. You have new employees, particularly teachers, instructional employees. You have new employees. You have mid-career employees, and then you have late career employees. And your leadership model allows for you to treat all those different employees in those different categories slightly differently. You're going to be more supportive with the newer folks because they've got a lot to learn and they got a lot to come up to speed on. You're going to be a little bit more, have a higher expectation of those people in mid-career because they ought to be at the height of their abilities. And those folks that are late career, you're going to be worried about getting them participative. You're going to take on that participative sort of thing because you want to keep them engaged in the building. But most of your energy is going to come out of the mid-career people and the new people. And so your situational leadership, once again, you've kind of categorized those people that work for you into different sort of bands or subcategories, and then you're going to kind of deal with them based on that. So it is a situational leader it's kind of more useful in an instructional role. It maybe is not as useful in some of the other sorts of roles. Thoughts about any of these? Any of these styles or leadership models that you have witnessed close up?
Kind of got me questioning myself because I've only been in a school no more than 5 years. It's been 3 years, 5 years, and now I'm on year 4. So it's kind of one of those things that I guess I'm not a jumper by no means, but whenever I put down for a reference, it's been for career advancement. Right. But I have seen in our school, we've had a math teacher that, I mean, he's nationally board certified. The kids like him, but he's just not a team player, and he's rude, and he said he doesn't ask for any help and direction on curriculum, and he's been trying to get out for 3 years, and he finally got out this year, but he had to go to another county, and it was after August 1, and the principal had every right to hold him those 30 days. But he told him, he says, if you're going to hold me those 30 days, I'm not going to accept that job. So the principal let him go. So now the math department is doing the work of 7 people with only 6.
Yeah.
So that's one of those HR things that, I don't know, maybe we can all learn from it.
Well, in the long term, you may be better off. You see, that's always what's also in the back of the mind of building leadership is, you know, what's the best decision? What's the better decision for the long term? I mean, can I support the teachers in this shortage that we have going right now? And will that in the long term make it better?
And that's what's hard, because the math department, they're having to pick up the load for his classes with no teacher to replace them. And now it's getting to the point almost where, are the teachers that are doing the work, should they get another stipend?
Yeah.
For having more kids added to the rosters, that, and especially during this remote learning and more workload. I mean, my wife's definitely affected by it, along with multiple people in her department.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough call. I mean, the toughest part of leadership is always people. It's not, you know, figuring out budgets and, you know, all that sort of stuff. The toughest part of leadership is always people. And they will always be the ones that create the quandary. And they'll always be ones that, you know, want to kind of play the power game, so to speak. There are lots of school divisions, by the way, in lots of states that no longer are paying additional stipends and stuff for national board certification. I mean, it's kind of lost some of the luster, if you like that term, that it once had. But it doesn't necessarily mean that national board certified people don't know what they're doing. They certainly do.
But they recently changed the certification process for national board. It's a lot easier to get now than it previously was.
Yeah.
Like you have a multi-year span to submit all of your essays and do everything, where you used to have to do all of the work within one academic year.
Yep. And that's the exact reason that a lot of places have devalued, you know, the kind of the highlight that they put on national board certification. They'll still have it in the literature and all that, but when the national board certification folks started turning down more people's portfolio than they started accepting, you know, it's kind of like, App has a doctoral program, and I'm work intimately in that doctoral program with a lot of students and all. But if you admit a doc student, you're basically saying, we're going to get you through this. We're going to get you through this. You work with us. We're going to get you through this, and you'll get out the other end with that doctorate. There's a lot of work in it, but we'll get you through this. And because if you have a doctoral program and you're only graduating, you know, 50% of the people that start, or 70% of the people that start, you won't have a doctoral program very long. Particularly if you're not a Harvard or a UVA or Ohio State or something like that. I mean, if you're a comprehensive institution or, you know, a smaller institution, then you're not going to have a doc program very long if you don't find ways to make sure that people finish, get people through. And so you'll see. I don't know. But it's, you know, that's kind of the thought process there too, is that you have to, things of value have to have a value. They're not intrinsically things of value. National board certification, the value of that is that you can be a better teacher because you are a scholar of the teaching process, the learning process, the curriculum process, you spend a lot of time, kind of dwelling and researching and looking at those things. And so if you're national board certified, you're a value because you're a better teacher. But we don't have, once you begin to value in it, then it becomes, it's like everything else. If everybody has a ton of gold, then gold's not worth much. So I'd like to give it a try, but if everybody's got a ton of gold, there is no supply and demand. But it is a difficult sort of process to go through. Glickman's developmental approach to supervision. In a nutshell, what Glickman, and he wrote endlessly on this stuff. He wrote on it. He wrote, countless papers on it, and he had 2 or 3 books. This was a piece that was in the educational journal Ed Leadership, and was kind of the key article for that particular journal in 1980. And so back in the 80s and maybe into the late 80s, early 90s, there was a theory, and it was really kind of a novice to expert theory about leadership, and it applied to other things too. If you think about, a teacher, think about that first year you were in a classroom. I mean, you didn't know anything. You were basically just trying to keep up for the next day or two. And you encountered every day. You encountered things that you had never seen before, or every week. And so, teaching was something that was entirely new to you, and so your basic concern, as Glickman talked about, was this sort of self-adequacy. Can I do this? Do I have the skills to do this? Can I manage this? Can I make, how good am I in doing this? And no amount of ego and cockiness can get you over that, because, at some point, kids are going to buffalo you around something. And so you have a lot of these self-adequacy concerns. Well, as a supervisor of other individuals, it's the same thing. You kind of early on you tend to take on a very directive model, because you really don't want to have a lot of interaction, because you're still trying to get a good sense of who you are and what you can do. And as you get more experience or more time, you kind of move toward this idea of having a classroom impact, as a teacher or a supervisor, where you want to be someone that can have an impact on teachers' well-being and on students' learning and all those things. And so now you know a little bit better what you can do and what you can't do, and what's your strengths, weaknesses, and all that. So you kind of shift into this collaborative mode where you're working with teachers to help them figure out what's the best thing to do to make themselves a better teacher, but also for the betterment of students. And then as you kind of mature into a skilled supervisor or a skilled manager, it becomes more altruistic, and you want to have an impact on other teachers. You want to have an impact on the building itself, the system. You really want to not be focused just on your little part of the world, but you want to have a bigger impact. And so you go through these cycles of from egocentric to altruistic. And so in my mind, it's kind of a novice to expert sort of thing. As you go along, your motivation becomes less internal and becomes more external. You see a problem, so you want to fix it. As opposed to, I need to figure out what my strengths and weaknesses are. I need to fix my weaknesses. Well, as you go along and you get more skilled and you get more comfortable and all, then you sort of see a, you know, here's a problem, I need to fix it. And, you know, I can do that. I'm not worried about not being able to do that. And so it is this sort of evolution that takes place. And yeah, I don't know where you are in your sort of career paths. You know, obviously you're taking this class, so you're thinking about supervision, you're thinking about, you know, leadership, building leadership, or curriculum leadership, or, you know, some form of leadership. So you're kind of moving in that direction. And so first you have to get through this sort of self-adequacy stage when you want to feel that, you know, you can do this and you got the skills to do this, and you're not too worried about, you know, what teachers might think about you or if you screw up or whatever. I mean, you're kind of comfortable in your own skin, just so to speak. And then you're mature into more being in a classroom, in fact. Have you seen differences in comfort levels between assistant or associate principals and principals? Some of you are already in positions like that. I'm sure you can kind of think about yourself and think about your interactions with the, you know, the people up the food chain just a little bit. I mean, where would you put yourself? Where would you tag yourself in sort of this progression? You have to kind of think it through. I mean, you have to really, you know, it's not going to work and you know, doing the same thing every day and just getting through the day. You really are taking on a bigger role when you move into a supervision or leadership role. And so you know, the expectations are a little bit higher. And you'll go through this sort of evolutionary process. Nobody want to bare their soul, huh? Okay. Well, that's okay. Just mull on it. Keep it in mind that you know, you're not the first thing I learned long time ago, and I know you hate war stories. First thing I learned a long time ago, and you know, this when I got into teaching, I was a couple of years older than all the other new teachers because I had spent a couple of years in the Army, and back in the Vietnam era sort of thing, and was just happy that I wasn't in the shooting. You know, I was at Arlington National Cemetery and the honor guard there for almost 2 years. And I wasn't in the shooting, but I participated in a little bit over 500 funerals in that 2-year period. And so, you know, I didn't have any scars from the conflict, but I had scars from just the constant emotional turmoil that you go through if you're doing 4, 5, 6 funerals a day and trying to keep the decorum and keep the sincerity going and all like that. But anyhow, when I got out and started teaching and got my first teaching job, you know, I thought it was the cat's meow because I was always sort of a little bit egotistical, but also, you know, I was a little bit older and I'd had some different experiences than a lot of the other new teachers and things like that. And I had this sweet little old lady who was my methods professor and head of the department that I was in down at Virginia Tech at the time, getting my licensure and all. And little old Lucy called me in her office one day, and she was one of those, you know, little old Southern ladies that had the little fruit at her neck, you know, little fruit thing buttoned all the way up, but man, she was steel. And she called me in. She said, you know, there's one big thing you still need to learn. I said, well, Lucy, what is it? What is it, Mrs. Crawford? What is it, Dr. Crawford? And she said, you know, you never, ever, ever are the smartest person in the room. There's always somebody smarter than you. And sometimes it's not the obvious ones. And, you know, that's the one lesson I took into anything I did after that. And that was that, you know, you figure out who's the smartest person in the room, and you follow them. You don't contest them. You follow their lead, because, you know, smart people tend to do good things. And so, you know, that was kind of my lesson in leadership and supervision. And as I went, you know, kind of forward and did some leadership and supervision roles, and I always kept that in the back of my mind, is you know, you're never the smartest guy in the room, person in the room. I wasn't saying that in a sexist sense. I was just saying you're never, you know, there's always somebody in the room smarter. And in that case, if you were ever in a room with Lucy Crawford, she was the smartest person in the room. And if there was anybody smarter, I'd hate to run across them. But so it was, you know, the whole leadership model that you adopt, the leadership roles that you adapt, to a certain extent, they have to align with who you are, but they also have to align with the organization that you're moving into leadership in. And so you have to have a plan B, you have to have a model B or a mode B or whatever to think about how you get, how you are productive or have any sort of efficacy in an organization. Okay, off soapbox, off of PowerPoint. Let me close that out. It's what time is it? 7:03. So let's take a little break. Let's take about 10 minutes. Then I want to come back and I want to talk about strategic planning a little bit, and kind of walk through that model, that notion, not a model, but a notion of strategic planning that we tend to use a lot in schools. And you know, we talk about backward planning, we talk about logic modeling, we talk about all those things. Those are actually very commonly used strategic models that we have kind of used in different scenarios, and we call them different things, but the notion, all of those speak to the idea of strategic planning and strategic direction, figuring out strategic direction, and this sort of notion of where the gaps are between where you are and where you want to be or where you need to be. And so let's take about, well, let's come back at 7:15 and say do about another 45-minute or so spell on strategic planning. Talk about what comes next, talk about the project, talk about getting you all squared away and lined up so that you can get into your group work. And then we'll kind of go from there. So any thoughts, questions, comments before we take a break? All right. See you in about 10 or 11 minutes, about 7:15 or so.